Today's daf is Menachos daf Samach Zayin. We are at the very top of daf Samach Zayin Amud Aleph, Gilgul Hektish. So the context of today's daf is what it's been since the beginning of the parak, and that is the Korban Omer. The Korban Omer was a Korban Mincha. That's why it's discussed in detail in Mesachtes Menachos. And as we've seen, it had a significance in that the Korban Omer, which was brought on Tes Zayin Nisan, was matter the Tfuah HaChadasha. So the Yidden would literally wait with bated breath for this Korban Omer to be brought, and as soon as the Korban Omer was brought, they were allowed to eat from the Tfuah HaChadasha. Now the Torah in Parshas Emor details exactly how the Korban Omer was brought and some of the ceremony that surrounded it. But the first thing that happened was Kohanim on Motzoi, the first night of Pesach, would go into the field, they would harvest some Tfuah, they would bring it into the Beis HaMikdash, and then from that, a Korban Mincha was brought. And the Mishnah Daf Samach Vav and Aleph discuss what happened with the remainder of the Tfuah that wasn't used for the Korban Omer. Did it have Kedusha? What exactly was done with it? And the Mishnah said that it's a Machlokes, the Tana Kama and Rabbi Akiva. Vashar nifta v'nechel l'chol adam, says the Mishnah. In terms of the leftover of the Korban Omer, it was redeemed, and once it was redeemed, it was allowed to be eaten by anybody, meaning even the Yisrael, not only Zichrei Kahuna, stating that v'chayev b'chala upatim and amaisa, Rabbi Akiva m'chayev b'chala ubemaisa. There was a machlokes Tanaim exactly how to treat this tfuah after it was already redeemed. The Tana Kama says that it certainly was chayev and chala, like all isa, like all tfuah is chayev and chala. However, upater min amaisa, there's not going to be a chayev meiser. Rabbi Akiva said v'chayev b'chala ubemaisa, and the Gemara and Daf Samach Vav and Beis had a detailed discussion what exactly the makar, why is it that Rabbi Akiva holds that chayev b'maiser? And really the premise to this discussion is that there's a halacha revacha b'Yisrael, and this is really Hilchos Trumas u'Maisros 101, and that is that miruach hektish is pater min ha'maisa. So what's miruach? We know that once upon a time, certainly bizban shebeis hamikdash hayekayim, certainly bizman bayis rishon, if a person had a field, tfuah grew in his field, he wasn't allowed to eat from the tfuah until he gave his taxes, truma, Meiser, Meiser Rishon, Meiser Sheni, Meiser Ani, etc., etc. If a person would eat from the tfuah without being mafresh trumas u'maisros, he violated the Issa Tevel. Issa Tevel is very chomer. As a matter of fact, the Gemara says chayev misa midei shamayim, stating that a person was only chayev in trumas u'maisros midei raisa once the melacha of the tfuah was deemed to have been completed. When it was considered to have been nigmar malachtoi, that's when there was a chayev trumas u'maisros midei raisa. Before it was nigmar malachtoi, there was no chayev trumas u'maisros midei raisa. What's the definition of nigmar malacha? So Chazal's definition was miruach. Miruach was the malach of smoothing the heap of tfuah that was in the field. When that happened, it was considered that the malacha was already complete, and as a result, there'd be a chiyuv trumas u'maisros midei raisa. Before that, there's not going to be a chiyuv trumas u'maisros midei raisa. The halacha is that if hektish owns tfuah and the miruach of the tfuah took place when it was in the rishos of hektish, if somebody else goes now and buys that tfuah from hektish, he doesn't have a chiyuv to be mafresh trumas u'maisros. And the reason is because miruach hektish is pater min ha'maiser. Now the Gemara suggested that the Tana Kama that says that if somebody would now be poida, the leftover of the tfuah that wasn't used for the Korban Omer, the reason it'd be pater min ha'maiser is presumably because it's miruach hektish, and miruach hektish is pater min ha'maiser. If that's the case, Rabbi Akiva mechayev, Rabbi Akiva who says there is a chiyuv trumas u'maisros, argued Rav Kahana in the Gemara, he would seem to be a das yachid, he would seem to argue with this halacha that everybody seems to know, and he would seem to be the opinion that even though the miruach took place in the rishos of hektish, he's chayev min ha'maiser. Rav Kahana walked into Beis Medrash and he said that even though everybody knows miruach hektish is pater min ha'maiser, I think there's a shittas Rabbi Akiva, which has implications, because halacha Rabbi Akiva, mechavei roi, mechavei rav. But if this is Rabbi Akiva, then this is very, very important. Rabbi Akiva holds that even though the miruach of this leftover tfuah took place in the rishus of hektish, still there's a chiyuv trumas u'maisros. But the Gemara says that that's not pshan Rabbi Akiva. In fact, Rabbi Akiva himself said that that's not pshan Rabbi Akiva, and pshan Rabbi Akiva has nothing to do with miruach hektish. Rabbi Akiva holds miruach hektish as pater min ha'maiser. But over here, the money that was used for the ktsira was given al a t'nai, and the t'nai was that whatever's given going to be used for the Karban should have hektish. Whatever's not going to be used for the Karban should not be treated as hektish. It shouldn't have its kedusha, and it's for that reason that there's going to be a chiyuv meiser. Regardless, so the Gemara mentioned the halacha of miruach hektish, which at the end of the day, the maskanas Gemara, everybody holds as potem and a meiser. So the Gemara went from there and digressed for a moment and said, what about miruach evdei kechavim? What if a guy owns tfuah? And the miruach took place while it was in the rishos of a guy. A yid now buys the tefurah from a guy. Is he chayiv or is he not chayiv? Now, first glance, you're going to tell me, if the guy owned the field and the crops grew in his sada, why is there a chiyuv chumas and maisus in the first place? It's a good question, but really it's a sugi in Shas. The Gemara in a few places discusses whether yesh kinyan biyad oiv the kechavim lafkim de maiser. So clearly, this discussion assumes that just because a guy owns the field doesn't mean there's no chiyuv chumas and maisers. So the question is, if a guy owns a field and the miruach took place in a guy's field, and now a yid buys it from a guy, so do you say just like miruach hektish is pater, miruach oivdei kechavim as well, or maybe not? And here the Gemara said it's machlokes Tana. Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda both hold that miruach oivdei kechavim is chayev mitrumas u'maisros. Reb Yotzei and Reb Shimon hold that miruach oivdei kechavim is pater mitrumas u'maisros. So miruach hektish, everybody agrees is pater. Miruach oivdei kechavim, it's machlokes Tana. Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda both hold chayev. Reb Yotzei and Reb Shimon both hold pater. The topic of today's daf is going to be challah. Now, challah is to dough what truma is to tfuah. So just like the Torah says, reishis the gancha, you have to go and be mafresh, give to the kohanim, and it has kedusha. And if a yid eats it and doesn't give it to the kohen, he's chay misab dei shamayim. If a yid is mafresh it, so now it's truma, and then he eats it, he's also chayiv misab dei shamayim. You have very similar halachas as it relates to dough. The Torah says, reishis arisay seichem, the reishis of your dough has to be given to a kohen. If you eat it without giving it to a kohen, misa b'dei shamayim, it's tevel. If you mafresh it, eat it, then you're also going to be chayev misa b'dei shamayim. The point is that challah is to dough what truma is to tfuah. And just like as it relates to tfuah, you're not chayev in truma midday raisa until it's nigmar malachtai miruach. The same is true by challah. The Gemar Malach, as relates to Challah, is what's known as Gilgul. And the Gemara now brings that Rava discuss what would be the halachas of Gilgul Hektish and Gilgul of the Kechavim. Meaning, Miruach Hektish, we said everybody holds as Potter min ha-maisres. Miruach of the Kechavim is a machlokes. Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda on the one hand, Reb Yotzei and Reb Shimon on the other hand. The question is, what about Gilgul? Gilgul Hektish and Gilgul of the Kechavim. Says the Gemara, Gilgul Hektish, Poiter, Gilgul Hektish is Potter min ha-chala. It's a mefurish Mishnah. Iktish isasa achaloi Gilgul. If somebody was maktish his dough, so a person had dough, and he said, I want to give it to hektish. And it was before he did the Gilgul, meaning there was no chiyuv chala yet. Uptasa. And then he was poide it also before he ever did the Gilgul, and now he rolls it, and he's making challah, and he has a shayla. Do I have to be mafresh challah or not? The halach is chayeves. He's certainly going to be chayev. And the reason is because even though it was hektish for a short period of time, but at the time that the chiyuv challah went into effect, which is at the time of the Gilgul, it belonged to the hedyet. He had been poided. And as a result, the chiyuv challah went into effect at a time that it wasn't hektishes, thus he's chayiv and challah. Misha Gilgul, what would be if somebody owned dough, he was megalgul the dough, so he's chayiv and challah, and then he was makdish it, upadas, and he was poided. And now he bakes it. He wants to know, do I have to be mafresh challah? Also chayeves. Because here too, the Gilgul happened before you were makdish it. It happened in the rishus of hedyet. As a result, you chayiv and challah. Hiktisha actually Gilgul, what would be if somebody was makdish his dough before the Gilgul, the Gilgul ha-gizbar, and then the gizbar, hektish, went ahead and was megalgul, and then he was poided p'tura. And the Mishnah says very clearly, because in this case, at the time that the chiyuv challah went into effect, it belonged to hektish, and as a result, Gilgul hektish is potem and achala. So Rava said it's mefurish. Just like miruach hektish is potem and amaiser, so too Gilgul hektish is potem and achala. But what's the halacha regarding Gilgul of the kichav? Yeah. We'll see. Rav is going to say it's really a mefurish Mishnah as well. But the essence of Rav's shaila is not whether you can find a source that Gilgul over the Kechavim should be patam and achala, but rather, do we say that just like by miruach over Kechavim, it's a machlokes Tana, and there's a shittas from Meir and Rabbi Yehuda that holds that miruach over Kechavim is chayevin meiser. Perhaps Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda are going to hold that Gilgul over Kechavim is going to be chayev as well. And the Gemara explains. really it's a Mishnah Tanakh. Gershon is Geyer, also Masachtas Chalav. Ger was Megayer, and he had dough. So a person was Megayer, he had a pantry full of food, and one of the things he had was dough. Not actually in his Geyer, if he had prepared this dough. Meaning, he did the gilgul of the dough before he became a ger. The halach is potter. He's going to be potter. Because it was gilgul over kechavim. Misha is chayiv if he did the gilgul after he became a ger. Chayiv. Safek if he's not sure when he did the gilgul, before the gers or after the gers. Chayiv, he's going to be chayiv. Bottom line. Hamank Tanila, who is the Tana of the Mishnah? And that was Rav Shaila. Meaning, it's a mafurish Mishnah that gilgul over the kechavim is going to be potter. But his Shaila was, who's the Tana of the Mishnah? What are the two stuff? Divri Akoili, is the Tana of the Mishnah everybody? Vafilu Ramei Rabbi Yehuda to come a chayvi hasam, patri hachan, even Ramei Rabbi Yehuda that hold that miruach over kechavim is chayv and shumas u'maisres. They too hold that gilgul over kechavim is potter menachal. What's the svara? And Rava said, I'll explain it to you. Hasam over there by Truma, the chsiv, it says the gancha yaseir. It says twice in the Torah the gancha that you have to be mafresh Chumas and Maisers from your dagan. Now, the gancha seems to suggest the dagan of a yid, not the dagan of a guy. But being that it says the gancha twice, havi miyut achar miyut, what's a double negative? A positive. They miyut achar miyut, el rabbis have the kechavim. So said Rabbi Yehuda, said Rava, the makar Ramei Rabbi Yehuda, that hold, that miruach ev kechavim is chayv and Chumas and Maisers, I know, is the gancha, a miyut achar miyut, el rabbis. Now, that it says by Truma and Meiser. So I have a makar by Truma and Meiser that Miruach Evikechavim is going to be Chai. But when it comes to Chala, maybe even Ramei Rabbi Yehuda are going to hold its potter. Because although Trei Zimni Ksivi, even though it says it twice here too, it says Arisoi Seichem twice, but I need the two times that it says Arisoi Seichem. Chad Arisoi Seichem K'dei Yisaschem, because once I needed to teach me what the shir of Chal is. We'll see a little bit more about that in Amud Beis. V'chad Arisoi Seichem, Lo Yisas Evikechavim, and the other Arisoi Seichem I need to tell me Davka the Isa of a Yid, not the Isa of a guy, V'lo Yisas Hektish, and also not the Isa of Hektish. But the bottom line is, Rava argued that it could be this Mishnah, this Stam Mishnah, Masachtas Chal, that says that the Isa of a guy is chayev is potter from challah. Maybe he's going even according to Ramei and Rabbi Yehuda, because even though Ramei and Rabbi Yehuda hold that miruach oivekechavim is chayev in trumas u'maisros, but maybe there's a difference between miruach, meaning truma, and gilgul, meaning chala. And what's the svara? The makar. I have a makar to be mechayev miruach oivdei kechavim. I don't have a makar to be mechayev isas oivdei kechavim. In fact, if anything, I have a miyut as it relates to isas oivdei kechavim, because I only have one arisai seichem, and arisai seichem would seem to suggest dafka the isa v'yid, not the isa v'goy. But Rava said, I'm not sure. Maybe not. Maybe Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon tani law. Maybe this Mishnah Masechtas Chal is going according to Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon that hold that miruach oivdei kechavim is potter. So too gilgul oivdei kechavim is going to be potter as well. But maybe Rabbi Yehuda are going to be mechayev here. We just said very nicely that Ramei and Rabbi Yehuda have a makar to be mechayev the tfuah of a guy in Trumas and Maisros. They don't have a makar to be mechayev the isa of a guy in chala. If anything, they have a meal tarisoi seichem. But gamri reishis. Rava says maybe they learn exer shava reishis miyasam. It says reishis by chala, reishis tarisoi seichem, and it says reishis by Trumas and Maisros. So just like miruach evikechavim is chayev in Trumas and Maisros, maybe isa evikechavim the gilgul of a guy is going to be chayev in chala as well. And the Gemara says that was Rava Shaila, and Rava concluded. He said Yehi Rava de echse bechelma. He said, I daven that I should have a dream, and in my dream it should be told to me what exactly the halacha is. Either way, the Gemara says, Hada Amar Rava, who initially wasn't sure, later, as the Gemara so often says, Hada Amar Rava, there's always a before and after in Rava. Hada Amar Rava, Manda Amar Miruach Ha'ivekechavim Poiter, Gil Ha'ivekechavim Potter. Manda that says Miruach Ha'ivekechavim is Potter, meaning Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon are going to hold that Gilgul Ha'ivekechavim is Potter as well. But Manda Amar Miruach Ha'ivekechavim Einei Poiter, but a mayor and Rabbi Yehuda that hold Miruach Ha'ivekechavim is not Potter, Gil Ha'ivekechavim Einei Potter. Meaning Rava had a tzad to say that the Mishnah Masechtas Chalot that says Gil Ha'ivekechavim is Potter is going according to everybody, even Ramei and Rabbi Yehuda, as if to say there's a chilik between Truma and Chala. Hadam and Rava, there's no chilik. Truma and Chala is all one and the same. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line is Miruach Hektish is Potter. So if somebody buys Tfuah from Hektish owns a field, they have crops, the Miruach took place in the Rishos Hektish, now they sold it to a Yid, it was Nifta, like in our Mishnah here in Mesachtes Menachos, somebody went ahead and he bought now this tfuah from Hektish, he doesn't have to be mafresh Trumas U'Maisros, because it's halacha that miruach evi kechavim is patim in Trumas U'Maisros. The same is true as it relates to challah. If somebody would buy dough from Hektish, Hektish did the Gilgal, or the Gilgal took place while it was in the Rishus of Hektish. Now a Yid, a head Yid owns it, doesn't have to be mafresh challah, because Gilgal Hektish is also pater menachala. What about a guy? If a guy owns tfuah in Eretz Yisrael, or if a guy owns dough, and he did the miruach, or the miruach took place when it was in the rishus of the guy, or the gilgal took place while it was in the rishus of the guy, is there a chiyuv trumas u'maisros and challah respectively? It's a machlekes tanan. According to Rab Meir and Rab Yehuda, yes, midday raisa. According to Rab Yossi and Rab Shimon, the answer is going to be no. Just one interesting thing that we're not going to speak about. Today's daf is #no raid. But Rava said, Yehei Rava de echsei bechelma. He says, I daven that I should have a dream, and in the dream they should tell me exactly what the halach of Ramei and Rabbi Yehuda is, what their shita was regarding Gilgal of the Kechavim. Really, this is an interesting Gemara on many fronts. Number one, could you even rely on a dream? If somebody has a dream, and in his dream they're megala something to him, does it even mean anything? L'chura, dreams are full of dvarim b'teilim. So if somebody has a dream, from a halachic standpoint, can you even rely on what it was that was told to you in a dream? So we have a raid bite on this, Angel of Dreams, I think that's what it's called. But really it's Kiyadua, there's a famous tshuva from the Tashbitz, Kivegin Gilyan Hashas, Mesachtas Sanhedrin quotes this Tashbitz, but it's a famous Tashbitz where the Tashbitz says, and when it comes to dreams, there's two dinim. There's some dreams that are real, and there's some dreams that are fake, and being that it's impossible for a person to know whether a dream is real or fake, so there's a halach of Suffolk, and the Tashbitz said, so when it comes to Isser, Suffolk Isser, you go L'chumra. When it comes to Mammon, Suffolk Mammon, it's a fascinating tshuva. We have a raid bite on it. We've spoken about it many times in the past, but that's the first thing. So could you rely on a dream? I mean, there's many contradictions. On the one hand, there seem to be Gemaras that suggest that there are merit to dreams, Gemaras that suggest there's no merit to dreams. The Tashbit says, some yes, some not. It depends on if it's through the Malach, or if it's not through the Malach. The bottom line is, at the end of the day, it's going to be a machlokes. As it relates to the second thing, as far as dreams goes, is you have to know in general whether you can rely on divrei Torah that comes from a dream. Meaning, okay, a dream has merit to it, but from a halachic standpoint, what happened to Torah le b'shamayim? We know Torah is not ben hashamayim. The Gemara, Rebbe Eliezer, Tan Rachnoi, in the end of Perek Yezeu Neshech. So from a halachic standpoint, the third interesting thing that we're not going to speak about is that the Gemara, what comes to mind is the Gemara in Perek Koraya, where the Gemara talks about Rava and his dreams. So Rava and Abaya, in addition to all the similarities that you have with Abaya and Rava throughout Shas, they even used to dream the same dreams. And the Gemara says they used to go to a Peiser Chaloimos, his name was Barhedia, and Barhedia used to be Peiser Rava's dream one way, Abaya's dream another way. The bottom line is, that's another thing that we would have to go through, regardless of the Gemara Vaita. Rapapa asked Rava, so this is a non-Jew who had a firstborn donkey, and he was mafresh it, as the Torah says, he was mafresh a petach hamar, v'chala, or he was mafresh chala. So the halacha is, Maidi and Oisai, Shehu Pater, you have to notify him that he's Pater. V'chalasi nechelos azar, his chala has no kedusha, who petach hamar goes is v'avid by, his petach hamar has no kedusha, you can do whatever you want with it. Now, the Gemara makes an interesting dik. It sounds a little bit from here that this halacha, and this is the Teisefta Masechtas Trumas, relates only to petach hamar and to chala. It sounds like as it relates to his truma, the truma is going to be asa. The petach hamar has no kedusha, the chala has no kedusha. But his truma, it sounds like, does have kedusha. Says the Gemara, so clearly the Tana is, Ramei Rabbi Yehuda holds that Miruach Evi Kechavim is not pot, because dealing with a guy. And if there's a chiyuv truma, that means Miruach Evi Kechavim is not pot, but not truma. But at the same time, what does the Mishnah say? Or that they have to say, the Gilgal Evi Kechavim is paiter. So you see that there's a distinction between truma and chala, which was one of Rava's studim. Meaning, you see that even Ramei and Rabbi Yehuda that hold that that the miruach of a guy is chayiv and truma holds that the gilgul of a guy is pater from chala. The problem is Rava came out not like that side. It was one of Rava's two studim, but Hadam Rava not that way. Another kash on Rava. It's Rabbi Nulu Rava. Chalos avikei chavim be'eretz Yisrael, and this is also a teisefta in Mesechtes Chalos. So a lot of zroim. Chalos avikei chavim be'eretz v'trumasa b'chutz la'aretz. So if a guy has chala in Eretz Yisrael, or a guy has truma in chutz la'aretz, Medina Oisei Shu Pater, we tell him that this is silly, you're a guy. Memela, chalasoi nechelas lezarim, v'trumasoi en bedamas. His chala could eat the maizram, his truma, if it gets mixed up in the taruvas with chulin, nothing to worry about. Now, the Gemara makes a very obvious deal. Ha-trumasoi ba'aretz asura. It sounds like his truma in Eretz Yisrael would be asur u'medamas. And if it would be mixed up with the taruvas, it would be a problem. So that's the Gemara for Haytana, Dama Miruach Evikachameni Pait. So clearly we're going according to the Tana that holds that Miruach of a guy is not pot. And who's that Tana? It's two Tana. It's Rameh and Rabbi Yehuda. And still, what does the Brisa say? Gilgul ha'evikechavim paiter. So again, you see that there's a difference between miruach and gilgul. There's a difference between truma and between chala. So it's a kasha and rava, because the Gemara came out hada amar rava that there is no difference between chala and between truma. And whoever holds that miruach evikechavim is chayiv is going to hold gilgul evikechavim is chayiv. Here you see mefurish that according to Rabbi Yehuda, L'chura, based on the diukim in these two Toseftas, the Tosefta and Trumas and the Tosefta and Chala, that there is a difference between Miruach and Gilgal. There's a difference between Truma. So the Gemara says, to answer both of these brises, you have to say Midirabanan. That is true. We have diukim in two brises that the tfuah of a guy is going to be Chayv and Truma. And it's clear that both of those brises hold that the Isa of a guy is not going to be Chayv and Chala. So we're going that Isa's potter and Tfuah is chayev. It sounds like it's a kasha on Rava, because it sounds like even Rameh and Rabbi Yehuda, who are the ones that hold that the Tfuah of a guy is chayev, hold the Isa's potter. But the Gemara says no. That when it's this dik, when it's mavur in this brisa, that the Tfuah of a guy is chayev, it's not midiraisa, it's only midirabanan, and everybody holds midirabanan, it's going to be chayiv. Even Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, that said that the miruach of a guy is on a deraisa level, but midirabanan, it's going to be chayiv. So really, the Mishnah is not Rameh and Rabbi Yehuda, because if the Mishnah was Rameh and Rabbi Yehuda, then there'd be no difference between the chala and between the truma. And just like it's mavur in the Tosefta that there's a chiyav truma on the guy's tfuah, it would have been mavur that there's a chiyav chala on the guy's isa as well. From the fact that it's the brisa say that there is no chiyav chala, clearly we're going according to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon. If we're going according to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, the diak is that it's mashman that the tfuah is chayiv. I thought the tfuah has to be potter. It's only a chiyuv midrabanan gzerim mishum bali kisin. Rashi says we're heard about people that are very, very wealthy and they have a lot of tfuah and they're trying to circumvent. They're looking for a tax loophole. So if they know that the miruach of a guy is potter and amaisris, what they're going to do is they're going to find a guy, make him a partner, or do something with the guy to somehow circumvent the laws of trumas and amaisris. So the chachamim said that you're not getting away with it. And miruach evikei chavim is going to be chayiv and trumas and amaisris. But enochanami, really, we're going according to Mandam that holds that miruach is potter, not Rameh and Rabbi Yehuda, potter, and that's why there's a ptur of chala as well. The chachamim were geyser when it came to trumas and maasros. Clearly, they weren't geyser when it comes to chala, and therefore the Gemara asks the obvious question: Hihachi afilu chala nami? Why were the chachamim only geyser by truma? Why weren't they geyser by chala? So the Gemara says, "Efsher de." Because chala, it's very easy to circumvent anyways. You don't need to make this takana to prevent because even with this takana you can get away with it. Because the only time you chayiv in chala is if you bake it a certain shear. You need a certain shear of dough in order to be chayiv in chala. What's the shear? Incidentally, it's 43 1/5 eggs. The Shach famously says that it's the gematria of chala. The gematria of chala is 43, and the hay at the end is the fifth. But regardless, it's 43 1/5. And being that it's easy to circumvent it, anyways, a chum didn't have to impose it. But the Gemara says, if that's the case, truma nami afshad avalak Rabbi Yishai, it's not so hard to circumvent truma either. There were some easy loopholes in the system as related to truma as well. And the Gemara mentions two. Number one, Rabbi Yishai. Dam Rabbi Yishai, marim adam al tfuasai umachnisa b'mayit shalai. And there's a big shaila in the Rishonim. Rashi himself says two pshatim exactly what this means. But Pashut, if a person would take the tfuah into his house while it's still in its shaft, which is really not the way humans eat tfuah, it's the way behemoths eat tfuah, then it gets treated as Meichel Behema, and it's Potter min HaMaisros. So even later, when you remove it from its shef, it's still going to be Potter from Maisros. So you could always do that. You could always circumvent it. You don't need a non-Jewish partner. There's another way to do it. Another eitzah is you can bring it into your house, derech gagas and karfifos. And we know the halacha is you only chayv if you bring it, kederech hamelech. But if you bring it in such a way, then you're going to be Potter. So what are you telling me, that we had to make this takana to say that even though miruach evkechavim midayurais is Potter min HaMaiser, but you're going to have to be chayav because we're afraid somebody's going to try to circumvent Shumas and Maisers, because so that he should, because he has his big business and he's going to want to get away with it. So they said, no, we're not going to let you. But we didn't do it by challah, because by challah there's another way out. By truma there's two other ways out. But the Gemara says no. The eitz is by truma and the eitz by challah is very different. Hasan befar hesya, zila by milsa. The two eitzes as it relates to truma is befar hesya. It's out in your field. People see you going, you're climbing in through your chimney. Derech gagas, derech karfifos. So it's befar hesya. People aren't going to be so inclined to do it. As a result, it's much easier to work out a deal with a non-Jew. That's why the Chachamim said that miruach evkechavim, even if midday rice is potter like Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, midrabanan, it's going to be chayiv. But hachab etzina, but what goes on in your kitchen, nobody really knows. So the dough, which is something that happens betzina, lo zila bein milsa. So if you're going to have the eitzah over here, that eitzah is a good eitzah, and as a result, it wasn't necessary to make this takana that the is of a guy is going to be chayiv midday rice. It's potter. There's no reason the Rabbanan to make it chayiv. Bottom line is the maskana. The topic of today's daf, which is really a digression from the digression, was miruach Oivekechavim, Miruach Hektish, Gilgal Oivekechavim, and Gilgal Hektish. Meaning, Tfuah that belongs to either Hektish of a guy, Chayiv and Shumas HaMaisres, or dough that belongs to either Hektish or a guy, Chayiv and Chala. As it relates to Hektish, it's easy. Even though it was a little bit of a discussion on Daf Samach Vavam and Beis, but the Maskan, it's very straightforward. The bottom line is that if Hektish owns a field, and the Gemar Malacha, the Miruach, took place while the Tfuah was still Bishos Hektish, a Yid buys it, it doesn't have to be Mafish Shumas HaMaisres. Miruach Oivekechavim is Potter. The same is true if Hektish owns dough. The gilgal, the dough was rolled while it was in the rishos of Hektish. A Yid buys it now. It doesn't have to be mafresh challah, because Hektish is potter min HaMaisres, and Hektish is potter min HaChallah as well. What about Oivekechavim? So that's a little bit more complicated. As it relates to Shumas HaMaisres, it's machlokes Tanan. Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda both hold that if a guy owns a field in Eretz Yisrael, the guy's kinyan doesn't have an ability to be mafkia, the kedusha of the field, and as a result, there is technically a chiyuv Shumas HaMaisres. And if the miruach took place, even in the rishus of the guy, it doesn't matter. There's still a chiyuv Shumas HaMaisres midday raisa. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon hold there is no chiyuv Shumas HaMaisres midday raisa. What about regarding challah? So there's a stam mishnah mesachtas challah. There are brises that seem to very, very clearly suggest that challah, the dough that's in the rishus of a guy, and the gilgal took place while in the rishos of a guy, if a yid buys it later, he's be potter. What Rava wasn't sure is that Mishnah and those brises by Chala going dafkin according to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon that hold that a guy's tfu is not chayiv in Maisres. It's according to those shitas that a guy's dough is not going to be chayiv in Chala as well, or maybe even Ramei Rabbi Yehuda that hold that a guy's field is chayiv in Shumas HaMaisres. Maybe they're going to agree that it's only Shumas HaMaisres. It's not going to be Chala. The Gemara said Hadam Rava. Rava came around and Rava said there's no difference. There's no way to be mechalik between Chala and Shumas HaMaisres. So according to Rabbi Yehuda that hold that a guy's field is chayiv in Shumas HaMaisres, so to a guy's dough is going to be chayiv. It's only Rabbi Yisrael, Rabbi Shimon that hold that a guy's field is potter from Shumas HaMaisres, that a guy's dough is going to be potter from Chala as well. Stating that, what emerged from the Gemara was that even Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon, who hold that a guy's tfuah is potter from Shumas HaMaisres, it's only on a deraisa level. Midrabanan not. Meaning, midrabanan, a guy's dough is still going to be potter from challah, but a guy's field is going to be chayiv in Shumas HaMaisres. At the end of the day, even Rava has to concede that there is a difference between Shuma and challah. However, not on the Dairaisa level of Maskanas HaGemara, is on the Rabbanon level. What's the difference? The difference is because if a person had a big business and a lot of Shumas HaMaisres to give, knowing that if a guy is a shutif, he somehow is potter from Shumas HaMaisres, he would be incentivized to be marin on Shumas HaMaisres, which would come at the loss of the Kehanim and the Leviim, Kumuvan, and that's something that we try preventing. And even though there's other forms of Harama, but the Gemara says this is the best form of Harama. But for Chala, there's easier ways to be marin, and therefore, a person would never be incentivized to do this, thus there was no reason to make such a gezerah.